The day my parents announced they were giving our entire family fortune to my adopted brother Marcus was the day I started questioning everything I knew about my life. "It's for the best, Daniel," my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "Marcus has the business acumen to manage the Stevens fortune. You're too creative." Creative. That was their polite way of saying I was a disappointment. At 32, I'd built a successful career as an investigative journalist, exposing corporate corruption and environmental scandals. But in the Stevens family, if you weren't working in finance or real estate, you might as well be finger painting. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking around our family's mahogany-paneled study. "You're giving Marcus, who you adopted when he was 16, complete control of a fortune that's been in our family for 4 generations." My father cleared his throat, straightening his perfectly pressed tie. "Marcus understands the importance of legacy. He's proven himself over the past 10 years. Proven himself, right, by following their every command, marrying the daughter of their closest business ally, and never questioning the family's more questionable business practices." Marcus sat in the corner, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair making him look every bit the heir they wanted. "Don't be bitter, Danny. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I stared at him, remembering the scared 16-year-old who'd arrived at our door a decade ago. My parents had called it charity, taking in a boy from a troubled background. They'd fast-tracked the adoption, given him the Stevens name, and started grooming him for something. I just hadn't known what until now. "I don't want to be taken care of," I replied. "I want to understand why you're throwing away generations of family tradition." "Family tradition," my mother laughed softly. "Daniel dear, you've spent the last 5 years writing exposés about the very kinds of businesses we run. You're hardly one to talk about tradition." She had a point. My latest investigation had uncovered a real estate scheme that displaced hundreds of low-income families. Exactly the kind of deal Stevens Properties specialized in. "At least I'm honest about who I am," I said, standing up. "This whole thing stinks, and you know it." My father's face hardened. "Watch your tone, Daniel. The decision is made. The papers will be signed next month." I left their mansion that night with more questions than answers. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. My parents had always been calculating, but this level of manipulation seemed extreme even for them. In my apartment, I pulled out my old research notebooks. Years of investigative journalism had taught me to trust my instincts when something didn't add up. I started a new page, Stevens Adoption Mystery. First question, why Marcus? Out of all the potential children they could have adopted, why choose a 16-year-old boy with a troubled past? I dug out the few photos I had from that time. Marcus's arrival had been surprisingly quick. No lengthy adoption process, no home studies that I could remember. One day my parents announced they were adopting, and 2 weeks later, Marcus moved in. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend and fellow journalist, Sarah Chen. "Heard about the inheritance bomb. You okay?" "Something's not right," I texted back. "Too many loose ends. Want me to run some searches. Got access to new databases at work." I smiled. Sarah worked for a major newspaper's investigation desk. Her resources were considerably better than mine. "Yes, everything you can find on Marcus Stevens, formerly Marcus Reeves. Adopted 2013. While waiting for her response, I started my own research. Marcus's public record before the adoption was surprisingly thin. A few school records from Chicago, some minor juvenile incidents that had been sealed. But nothing about his parents or early childhood. Sarah's reply came an hour later. "This is weird. His pre-adoption records are locked tight. Like, government level tight." That made me sit up straight. Government level, for an adoption, gets weirder. Found a sealed case file from 2013. Same month as the adoption, your parents' names are on it. I grabbed my keys. "Meet me at Joey's in 20. Joey's was our go-to place for sensitive conversations, a dive bar with terrible Wi-Fi and worse beer. But no cameras and a healthy disrespect for eavesdropping. Sarah was already there when I arrived, her laptop open to a complex web of documents and records. "Okay," she said. As I sat down. "Here's what I found. Marcus Reeves essentially didn't exist before 2012. The records show him entering the system in Chicago, but the documentation is suspiciously perfect. Like someone created a backstory." Created. Why would someone need to create a backstory? Usually, witness protection, or government ops. She turned her laptop toward me. "Look at this. The judge who approved his adoption retired immediately after, moved to the Cayman Islands. The social worker transferred to a cushy federal job 2 months later. I felt a chill despite the bar's stuffy air. You think my parents were involved in something federal? I think they were involved in something big enough to need federal coverage. She pulled up another document. Here's where it gets interesting. Found a sealed medical record from 2013. Only got a glimpse before the system kicked me out, but it mentioned genetic testing. Genetic testing. For an adoption. Sarah's eyes met mine. When was the last time you had a medical checkup at a facility not owned by Stevens Medical Group? I had to think about it. Our family had always used our own hospitals, our own doctors. Not since I was a kid, I guess. Why? Maybe it's time for a second opinion. She slid a business card across the table. Friend of mine works at an independent genetics lab. Very discreet, very thorough. I picked up the card, studying the embossed text. You think I should get a DNA test? I think there's a reason your parents are suddenly giving everything to an adopted son who appeared out of nowhere. And I think that reason might be written in your gene. The next morning, I visited the lab. Dr. Laura Patel was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Full genetic panel, she asked, preparing the blood draw. Any specific concerns? Just curiosity about my family history, I said, watching as she filled several vials. She gave me a knowing look. Family history can be surprisingly complicated. We'll run everything. Ancestry, health markers, genetic conditions, should have results in about 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I threw myself into research, digging deeper into my family's history. The Stevens fortune had started with my great-grandfather's railroad investments, grown through my grandfather's real estate deals, and exploded under my father's aggressive expansion into medical facilities and pharmaceutical research. Stevens Medical Group, in particular, had grown exponentially in the past decade. They'd built specialized research facilities, genetic testing centers, and high-security treatment wings that were off-limits to most staff. Sarah helped me compile a timeline. Marcus's arrival coincided with the biggest expansion of our medical division. The same year he was adopted, Stevens Medical had opened 5 new research facilities specializing in genetic medicine. My mother had taken a surprisingly active role in those facilities, despite having no medical background. She'd insisted on overseeing patient selection personally, something that had always seemed odd. Finally, Dr. Patel called. Her voice was tense. Mr. Stevens, could you come to the lab? There's something you need to see in person. An hour later, I sat in her office, staring at the results displayed on her computer screen. I ran the tests 3 times to be sure, she said quietly. Your DNA shows signs of significant genetic modification. Modification, what does that mean? She pointed to several markers on the screen. These sequences have been artificially altered. It's cutting-edge technology. The kind that's still technically experimental. Based on the patterns, this was done when you were very young, possibly as an infant. I felt the room spin slightly. Why would someone modify a baby's DNA? Usually to prevent genetic diseases or enhance certain traits. But this, she hesitated. This looks more like they were trying to suppress something. There are markers here that have been deliberately deactivated. Suppressed? Suppressed what? She met my eyes. Mr. Stevens, have you ever wondered why you're different from your family? Why you think differently, act differently? I nodded slowly. These suppressed sequences, they're identical to markers found in people with extremely high cognitive abilities, people who see patterns others miss, who question established systems, who can't ignore inconsistencies. She leaned forward. People who might, for example, become investigative journalists, despite coming from a family of business people. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying my parents modified my DNA to make me less perceptive? I'm saying someone did. And only a handful of facilities in the world had this capability in the early 90s. She pulled up another screen. One of them was Stevens Medical Group's first research facility. I left the lab with copies of everything. Test results, genetic markers, comparative analyses. My mind was racing with questions. Why would my parents alter my DNA? What were they trying to hide? And most importantly, what did Marcus have to do with it all? Back at my apartment, I laid out everything we'd gathered. The adoption records, the medical facility data, my DNA results. A pattern was emerging, but I couldn't quite see it yet. My phone buzzed. Sarah again. Found something big. Stevens Medical. Classified project from 1990 to 1995. Code name, here. Send everything. I texted back. As I waited for her files, I stared at a family photo from last Christmas. My parents perfectly poised. Marcus, the golden child, and me, the perpetual outsider. What else had they modified? What else had they hidden? The answer, I suspected, would change everything. Sarah's files arrived at midnight. Hundreds of pages of partially redacted documents, all bearing the Stevens Medical Group logo, and the ominous Project EAR header. What wasn't redacted told a story that made my blood run cold. Initial trials successful. Subject DS, shows decreased cognitive pattern recognition post-modification. Recommend continued monitoring. DS Daniel Stevens. But it was another document that really caught my attention. A memo from 1995. Marked contingency protocol. In the event of primary subject regression, secondary implementation may be required. Recommend identifying suitable candidates for program genesis by 2010. Program genesis. The same year my parents had suddenly developed an interest in adoption. I called Sarah, despite the late hour. These documents, they're talking about a backup plan. They modified me, and when it didn't work completely, they needed someone else. Marcus, she said quietly. But Danny, there's more. I found his original medical records from 2013. He underwent extensive procedures at Stevens Medical right after the adoption. They modified him too. No, according to these records, he was already modified. They were just adjusting him. The pieces started falling into place. Marcus hadn't been randomly chosen. He'd been created, probably years before, as a backup plan. A perfect heir. Genetically engineered to be everything I wasn't. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Marcus. Family dinner tomorrow. Don't miss it. Important announcement.
Mark.
Perfect timing. The next evening, I arrived at the Stevens mansion, armed with copies of everything we'd found. Sarah had arranged for the story to go live on her newspaper's website at exactly 8 p.m. during dinner. Sometimes the best defense is a public offense. The mansion's dining room was suffocating in its perfection. Crystal glasses, sterling silver, and enough tension to cut with one of the antique knives on the table. Daniel, my mother smiled tightly. So glad you could join us. Marcus has wonderful news. Marcus cleared his throat, straightening his tie exactly like our father did. The board has fast-tracked the inheritance transfer. By next week, I'll be officially named CEO of Stevens Holdings. Fascinating timing, I said, pulling out my phone and checking the time. 7:55 p.m. Almost like you're rushing to beat something. My father's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Just wondering about Project EAR and Program Genesis. And why you felt the need to modify your own son's DNA before he could walk. The crystal glass in my mother's hand cracked slightly. Marcus's perfect composure slipped for just a moment. I don't know what you're talking about, my father said. But his face had gone pale. No, let me refresh your memory. 1990, Stevens Medical starts a classified genetic modification program. 1991. I'm born and immediately become their first test subject. You suppressed my cognitive abilities, because you were afraid of having an heir who might question your empire. 7:58 p.m. But it didn't work completely, did it? I still saw through your schemes, still became someone who exposes corruption instead of profiting from it. So you activated your backup plan. Daniel, stop this nonsense immediately. My mother hissed. Marcus wasn't adopted. He was created, probably in one of your labs, probably years before he supposedly showed up at our door. A perfect heir, genetically engineered to be the son you wanted. 8 p.m. Right on schedule. All our phones buzzed with news alerts. I held up my phone, showing them the headline. Stevens Medical Group exposed illegal genetic modification program and corporate conspiracy. Marcus lunged for his phone, his carefully constructed facade cracking completely. You can't, this will destroy everything. Already did. I said, standing up. The FBI is probably reading these documents right now. Illegal genetic modification of minors, corporate fraud, falsifying adoption records. That's just the start. My father stood so quickly his chair fell backward. You fool, you have no idea what you've done. Actually, I do. Those suppressed genes you were so afraid of. They're excellent for investigative work. Should have thought that through better. My mother had gone completely still, her face a mask of cold fury. Everything we did for this family's future. Marcus was supposed to fix our mistakes with you. Fix me? I laughed bitterly. You mean make me more compliant, more willing to ignore corruption and abuse of power? Marcus was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to contact lawyers or PR teams. This is a mistake, Danny. We can fix this. Make the story go away. No, we can't, because in about 30 seconds, Sarah's second story goes live. The one about Stevens Medical's hidden research facilities, and their connections to several disappeared children over the past 20 years. The color drained from my father's face. You wouldn't dare. Already did. Turns out Marcus wasn't your only adoption. How many other families did you destroy to create your perfect heirs? Right on cue, phones buzzed again. The second headline was even more damning than the first. My mother stood up, her composure finally breaking. You don't understand. The modifications were necessary. The family legacy is built on destroying other families. I cut her off. How many children did you modify? How many did you steal and adopt out to wealthy families looking for perfect heirs? Marcus had gone completely silent, staring at his phone as story after story broke. His perfectly crafted world was unraveling in real time. The FBI will be here soon, I said, heading for the door. I'd start calling lawyers if I were you, though I doubt even the best lawyers can explain away genetic experimentation on children. My father made one last attempt. Daniel, please, we can make this right. Whatever you want, money, position, anything. I turned back to look at them one last time. My mother's cold fury, my father's desperate pleading, and Marcus the manufactured perfect son, looking lost and scared like the teenager he'd once been. What I want is justice. For myself, for Marcus, and for every other child you modified or stole in your quest for genetic perfection. As I walked out of the mansion, I could hear sirens in the distance. Sarah texted, FBI raiding Stevens Medical Facilities. You okay? Better than okay, I replied. Finally free. 6 months after the Stevens scandal broke, I sat in a federal courthouse, watching my parents being sentenced for their crimes. The evidence had been overwhelming. Decades of illegal genetic experimentation, dozens of modified children, and a corporate conspiracy that spanned multiple countries. My mother maintained her icy composure, even as the judge announced 25 years without parole. My father seemed to have aged decades in months. His shoulders slumped as he received the same sentence. Their empire had crumbled, their reputation destroyed, and their legacy exposed as a horror story of genetic manipulation and stolen lives. Marcus sat on the other side of the courtroom. After the truth emerged, he'd agreed to testify against our parents in exchange for immunity. The psychiatric evaluation had revealed the extent of his own victimization. He'd been genetically engineered from birth, his entire personality shaped through modifications and conditioning. The court also orders all assets of Stevens Medical Group and related entities to be liquidated. The judge continued. The proceeds will go to a victims' compensation fund for affected families and individuals. As I left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around me. 6 months ago, I'd been on their side of the microphone, chasing stories. Now I was the story. Mr. Stevens, how does it feel to expose your own family's crimes? What happens to the Stevens fortune now? Any comment on the genetic modification reversal program? I pushed through them gently, offering only justice was served. That's all that matters. Sarah waited by her car, holding a thick folder, ready for the next phase. The next phase. After the scandal broke, we'd discovered 47 other children who'd been genetically modified by Stevens Medical. Some, like Marcus, had been engineered from scratch using donor genetic material. Others, like me, had been modified shortly after birth. All of us had been part of my parents' twisted attempt to create perfect heirs for wealthy families. We'd formed a support group of sorts, meeting regularly to deal with the psychological impact of learning our entire lives had been manipulated at a genetic level. Dr. Patel had become our medical advisor, working with a team of ethical genetic specialists to understand and potentially reverse the modification. The first reversal trials are showing promise, Sarah said as we drove. Dr. Patel thinks they can restore your suppressed cognitive sequences without adverse effects. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how I felt about more genetic manipulation, even beneficial ones. And the others, most are doing well. That kid from the Robertson family, the one they engineered to be a musical prodigy, he's finally pursuing his real passion for environmental science. Turns out when you remove the engineered compulsions, people find their true paths. We arrived at the new research facility, funded by the seized Stevens assets, but run by an independent ethics board. Marcus was already there, looking more relaxed in jeans and a t-shirt than he ever had in his tailored suits. "Danny," he greeted me, the artificial polish gone from his voice. The latest results came in. They found the sequence they used to create my business instincts. Can you believe they literally programmed me to love corporate finance? His recovery had been remarkable. Once freed from the genetic and psychological conditioning, Marcus had discovered a genuine interest in genetic ethics and was now working with Dr. Patel's team to help other victims. "How's the therapy going?" I asked. "Better. Still processing the fact that I'm essentially a designer baby made to be a backup plan. But at least now I get to choose who I want to be." Inside, Dr. Patel was reviewing scans with several other survivors. The wall displayed a timeline of Stevens Medical's activities, each unethical experiment now exposed. "Daniel," she called me over, "we've identified something interesting in your genetic structure. The suppression wasn't as complete as they intended. Your natural cognitive abilities actually fought against the modifications, creating new neural pathways. Is that why I became an investigative journalist? My brain finding ways around their blocks." She smiled. "Exactly. Your inherent drive for truth was stronger than their genetic manipulation. It's quite remarkable." A young woman approached us. Angela Chen, no relation to Sarah, another survivor we'd discovered. She'd been engineered to be a perfect political heir, her empathy suppressed and her manipulative abilities enhanced. "The reversal treatment worked," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "I can feel things normally now. Actually feel them, not just calculate their usefulness." These moments made everything worthwhile. Watching the survivors reclaim their identities, their true selves emerging from under layers of genetic manipulation. Sarah was updating the wall display with new information. The investigation had gone international, exposing similar programs in other countries. Worldwide, over 300 children had been genetically engineered for wealthy families. "The UN is drafting new laws against genetic modification of minors," she reported. "Your story started a global conversation about genetic ethics." Marcus joined us, carrying printouts of his latest tests. They found something else. The loyalty programming they installed. It wasn't just psychological conditioning. They literally modified genes linked to attachment and obedience. "That explains a lot," I said, remembering how completely devoted to our parents he'd been. "Can they reverse it?" "Already started the treatment. It's strange feeling these artificial bonds breaking down, like waking up from a very long dream." Dr. Patel gathered everyone for the weekly support group meeting. Sitting in the circle, looking at these faces, all designed by others but now choosing their own paths, I felt a deep sense of purpose. "I've been thinking," I announced when it was my turn to speak. "We should establish a permanent foundation. Use the Stevens fortune to prevent this from happening to other children." The idea caught fire immediately. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan. The Free Genome Foundation, dedicated to protecting genetic rights and preventing unethical modification. Later that evening, I visited my mother's prized garden at the mansion. now being converted into a research and recovery center for survivors. The roses she'd obsessed over were still blooming, their perfect symmetry a reminder of her pursuit of genetic perfection. Marcus found me there, holding a DNA report. Just got this. Found my original genetic donors. Turns out I have biological siblings out there. Normal ones, born without modification. Are you going to contact them? He nodded. Already did. They're scientists, actually. Genetics researchers working on disease prevention. Guess some traits run in families, even when you're engineered to be something else. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun. That of T was some born natural, but suppressed. One artificially created to be perfect, both finally free to be ourselves. What happens now? Marcus asked. We heal. We help others heal. And we make sure this never happens again. My phone buzzed. Dr. Patel with the latest reversal treatment schedule. Tomorrow they would begin restoring my natural cognitive abilities.
Folks.
Marcus Ed. Wesember. The Frenetta Mothers Ember. Part of me was nervous, but mostly I was ready to discover who I was meant to be before my parents tried to redesign me. The Stevens legacy hadn't ended as my parents planned. Instead of perfect heirs, maintaining their empire of secrets, they'd created something entirely different. A movement to protect genetic freedom and human dignity. As I looked at the mansion, now transformed into a place of healing, I realized some inheritances are worth more than money or status. The truth, painful as it was, had set us all free. Marcus and I walked back inside, where other survivors were gathering for evening therapy. In their faces I saw not the perfect heirs our parents had tried to create, but something far more valuable. Authentic humans, reclaiming their right to be wonderfully naturally imperfect. The end.